The wind on the northern isles of Shetland is usually a gentle companion, a breath rather than a battering ram, particularly here in the sheltered coves of Yell, where the sea is a brilliant, almost impossible turquoise when the sun dares to break through the clouds. This is a place of quiet rhythms, the bleating of black-faced sheep against a backdrop of rolling, heather-clad hills that dip softly into the brine. The crofting communities are close-knit, built on centuries of shared hardship and quiet courtesy. People greet you with a nod and a genuine inquiry about your last catch or the state of your chimney insulation. It is by any measure profoundly peaceful. This peace shattered not with a bang, but with the delicate placement of a single, perfect specimen of Hymenophyllum tunbrigense, the delicate Killarney fern, on the chest of Angus MacLeod, a beloved retired lighthouse keeper found dead in his snug cottage overlooking the Sound. He had died in his sleep, his face relaxed, a faint, almost beatific smile upon his lips, yet the local medic confirmed a subtle poison, untraceable until the post-mortem toxicology report came back from Aberdeen, listing traces of monkshood, aconite, a plant not commonly found in the harsh Shetland topsoil. Detective Inspector Moira Shearer felt the weight of this unnatural intrusion like a physical coldness that the strongest peat fire couldn't dispel. She was standing in the cottage, the air thick with the comforting, familiar scent of old wool, paraffin and brewing tea, now tainted by the sterile smell of police procedure. Moira, sharp-eyed and rarely impressed by sentiment, found the scene deeply disturbing precisely because it lacked chaos. The killer was an artist of quiet control. Third one, Moira. Same method. Different flower signature, stated D.I. Alistair MacLeod, Moira's temporary partner from the mainland, leaning against the doorframe. Alistair was everything the islands were not, overtly handsome, flawlessly dressed even in the damp northern air, and possessing a structured impatience that grated on Moira's slower, more intuitive pace. First the sea pink, then the yellow saxifrage, now this fern. It's botanical poetry, and frankly, I'm tired of reading it. It's not poetry, Alistair, it's a syllabus, Moira countered, tapping the laminated evidence photo of the fern. They are all shade-loving, delicate, and require specific, moist microclimates. They aren't common roadside finds. Someone cultivates these, someone patient. The victims were disparate. Angus, the retired keeper, Mrs. Ilara Peterson, the kindest soul who ran the tiny essential post office in Mid-Yell, and Mr. Thomas Stout, the man who repaired the village tractors. No clear link, not financial, not social. The hook for the island, and soon the mainland press, was the sheer incongruity of the act in such a gentle setting. People here trusted each other implicitly. Who poisons an old man in his sleep and then adorns him with a rare fern? Moira needed an anchor, a voice that understood the intricate web of island life better than any data sheet. That voice belonged to Elspeth. Elspeth ran The Braid, a small, immaculate tea room in the relative bustle of Ulster, built into the side of a low hill, offering stunning views out towards the ocean. Elspeth wasn't born here. She arrived 5 years ago from the bustle of Glasgow, shedding her corporate skin for a life among the gannets and the ancient stones. Her arrival had caused some initial suspicion, but her quiet competence, her beautiful hand-thrown pottery sold alongside her tea, and her uncanny ability to stock exactly the obscure book someone was looking for, had won over the community. Her hair, the color of wet copper, was usually tightly braided, but today a few strands had escaped, framing a face that held an expression of profound concentration as she dusted a shelf of first editions. When Moira entered, the bell above the door chimed a soft, welcome note. The room was warm, smelling richly of dark Darjeeling and the subtle perfume of baked shortbread. "Moira, I feared you might stay away until the next bloom," Elspeth said, turning, her sea-green eyes instantly assessing the tension radiating off the inspector. "The next bloom could be anything. A poisonous foxglove, perhaps," Moira said, accepting a warm mug. "I need to think beyond the obvious. Elspeth, the flowers are too specific. They speak of knowledge, not just appreciation." They spoke for hours, tracing the victims' lives, finding nothing. The conversation drifted, as it always did when the professional shield lowered, toward the personal. The isolation of the case, the creeping paranoia of a hidden killer, had only pushed Moira further into the solace she found in Elspeth's calm presence. "You look exhausted," Elspeth observed softly, setting down her own mug. She moved around the counter, the movement unnervingly graceful. She stood before Moira, her shadow enveloping the inspector in the dim afternoon light filtering through the dusty windows. "You carry the weight of every life lost, Moira. You need something real to hold on to that isn't evidence tape." Moira reached out, gripping Elspeth's wrist, anchoring herself. The contact was electric, a desperate grasping for warmth. "I need clarity, and I need this." The ensuing moments were a surrender. The polite distance of the tea room dissolved into the raw necessity of their mutual need. The eroticism here was a deliberate, desperate counterpoint to the cold, methodical nature of the murders. It was about taking control of their own narrative against the rising tide of fear. Elspeth guided Moira to a small, curtained-off area where she kept her potting supplies and the kiln for her pottery, a space smelling richly of damp earth and mineral oxides. Here the formality of their roles vanished. The shedding of clothing became a ceremony of trust. Elspeth's touch was intelligent, exploring Moira's tired muscles with an expertise that mirrored her attention to detail in her craft. She traced the lines of stress around Moira's eyes, whispering reassurances that were more physical than verbal. When they came together, it was with a ferocity born of shared secrecy and the inherent loneliness of their intense roles. Elspeth's body was warm, yielding yet strong, a perfect complement to Moira's contained intensity. The experience was profound, not just physical release, but a deep, wordless communication. Elspeth explored Moira with a possessive tenderness, whispering Gaelic words of comfort against her skin, mapping the tension away with slow, deliberate caresses, focusing on the pleasure of simple, undeniable presence. It was a consumption that fueled, rather than depleted, Moira, binding them irrevocably in the shared, secret space against the island's encroaching dread. This connection, Moira thought fiercely in the aftermath, this is what I fight for. Not just justice, but this. Weeks passed. The investigation stalled. Alistair MacLeod was growing openly suspicious of Moira's long, secretive visits to the tea room, even if he couldn't articulate why. Moira, refreshed but haunted, returned to the floral evidence. The common thread wasn't just the type of plant, but the cultivation. These weren't wild finds, they were harvested from meticulously maintained collections. She pulled up property records for every rare plant collector, every small private horticultural society member on Yell. The list was surprisingly short. Only 3 people kept serious shade gardens suitable for monkshood and the specific ferns. One was a reclusive academic, one was a keen amateur naturalist, and the third name stopped Moira's heart, Mr. Kenneth Ken Irvine. Ken Irvine, 55, was the island's most respected librarian and archivist. He was a man so mild, so utterly unremarkable in his grey cardigans and slightly stooped posture that he was practically invisible. He lived alone in a neat, tiny house near the shore, known for his encyclopedic knowledge of Shetland genealogy, and his dedicated unpaid work cataloguing the island's fading oral histories. He was the man everyone turned to when they needed to know who their great-grandmother was, or where the old peat-cutting boundary lay. He was the keeper of the past. He was the least likely suspect. Moira and Alistair visited Ken's house under the guise of asking about historical records related to the lighthouse keeper. Ken offered them tea, his hands trembling only slightly as he poured. His house was immaculate, silent, and filled with books and carefully labeled archival boxes. Terrible business, this, Ken sighed, adjusting his spectacles. Such violence in our quiet corner. It's as if the darkness from the winter seas has crept ashore to stay. Moira's eyes swept the room, searching for the jarring note. It wasn't in the visible collection. It was in Ken's eyes, a look of profound, weary satisfaction. "Mr. Irvine," Moira began, her voice dangerously calm, "you've been cataloguing the oral histories for decades. You know everyone's lineage, don't you?" "I try to preserve what's left, Inspector. These islands are changing too fast. Young folk leave, traditions die. It's a quiet sorrow," Ken replied, his voice steady. "But you see the gaps, don't you? The impurities, Moira pressed, leaning forward. The things that don't fit the perfect picture of Shetland heritage you hold in your head. Ken looked up and the mask slipped. The mildness evaporated, replaced by a fierce, terrifying purity of vision. They were contaminating the narrative, Inspector. Angus was planning to sell his cottage to mainlanders. Hilara was teaching the children nursery rhymes from across the water, softening the Norse edges. Thomas was going to use cheap, mass-produced parts on the old machinery. They were letting the true spirit of Yell fade into sentimentality. I simply ensured their ending was as pure as the memories I wished to preserve. The shock of the revelation, the gentle archivist as the meticulous serial poisoner, was a physical blow. Alistair immediately moved to draw his weapon, but Moira held up a hand. She knew violence wouldn't work here. "The flowers, Ken." "Why the flowers?" she asked, needing the confession, needing to understand the source of this misplaced devotion. Ken's eyes softened with pride. "They are promises. They signify the essential life that remains. The Killarney fern, Inspector, is almost extinct in this latitude. I cultivated it perfectly in my cold room. I was showing them that beauty, true beauty, can only survive if it is carefully, personally curated. I was curating the island." As Ken spoke, his gaze drifted toward a small, locked wooden cabinet near the window, a case designed for displaying fragile artifacts. In his momentary distraction, Moira saw a faint, almost invisible wire leading from the cabinet to a pressure plate hidden beneath a rolled rug near the door. "You arranged this meeting well, Ken," Moira said, forcing a breathy admiration into her voice. "Your archive is magnificent. Is this cabinet where you keep your most prized pieces?" "The real treasures," Ken confirmed, his voice regaining its soft librarian tone. Moira looked at Alistair, a subtle shift of her weight, signaling the danger. She moved backward slowly, drawing Ken's attention while Alistair shifted to flank him. "I'd love to see them," Moira said, taking one more slow step towards the cabinet. At that exact moment, the door burst open. It wasn't the police reserve, it was Elspeth, breathless, her face white, having followed Moira's car and sensing disaster from the rigid silence she found outside. She saw Ken, the cabinet, and the way Moira's posture had shifted from colleague to prey. Elspeth didn't hesitate. She didn't shout. Instead, she hurled the heavy, wet bundle of archival preservation cloth she carried, a stack of damp, heavy felt squares used to wrap fragile maps, not at Ken, but directly at the thin wire leading to the pressure plate. The wet fabric slammed down, creating enough friction and weight to trip the mechanism prematurely, shorting the delicate trigger. Instead of an expected trap, the cabinet merely clicked loudly. The noise startled Ken into a frantic physical reaction. He lunged not for a weapon, but for the cabinet, trying to protect his treasures. Alistair, now free of the immediate threat of a trap, moved in with practiced efficiency, tackling the older man with firm restraint. The subsequent investigation revealed Ken's chilling dedication. Years of slow cultivation, meticulous dosing, found the sheer, terrifying belief that he was saving his community through selective, beautiful extinction. The ending was earned. The darkness receded from Yell. Weeks later, the harsh northern light seemed gentler. Moira had turned down the mainland promotion. She stood with Elspeth not in the police station, but in the Braid, now quiet for the afternoon. They were not discussing forensics, but curtains, deep blue velvet, to block the summer twilight when they wanted to sleep late. Elspeth, her hands stained with clay dust from an afternoon spent at the kiln, leaned against Moira. The tension had fully resolved into a deep, settled warmth. The fear was gone, replaced by the security of their shared future. "The sea is calm today," Elspeth murmured, tracing a finger along the line of Moira's jaw, a gesture of simple possession and peace. Moira leaned into the touch, the memory of the killer's cold artistry finally banished by the warmth of Elspeth's skin. "It is," she agreed, pulling Elspeth close, inhaling the familiar perfect scent of earth and tea. Finally, a peace that feels earned. They stood there, two unlikely survivors in a quiet, beautiful corner of the world, the only signature that mattered now being the lasting imprint of their clasped hands.